Hi everyone, good day. Good day and welcome to our sixth lecture in this subject, IS DIPCO, Diplomatic and Consular Studies. For our lesson for today, we will talk about military and defense diplomacy. And I believe that this is a very timely topic right now, especially AFP Chief of Staff Romeo Bronner Jr. last week said that the armed forces of the Philippines had already begun its 10-day training in order to equip Filipino soldiers to become resilient and knowledgeable on how to survive a war in case a conflict erupts in the upcoming days or years. But hopefully there will be no conflict. But yeah, that the very purpose of this ongoing training by the AFP right now is to enable our Filipino soldiers to defend the Philippine territory for at least 30 days because according to the general, uh, it will take at least 30 days for our allies to mobilize and help us. So that's why it is important for Filipino soldiers right now to be equipped with the necessary training and knowledge so that they can defend the Philippine territory. So my presentation for today is divided into the following topics. So I will first define the terms and differentiate the meanings of defense diplomacy versus military diplomacy. And then I will enumerate the purpose of military diplomacy. I will also provide examples of doing military diplomacy. And then I will provide a critical perspective of at military or defense diplomacy by looking at it from a political economy lens. Why am I doing that? Because it's an application of the theories that we've discussed in the past lectures. Wherein the first part of the lesson, the distinguishment or the distinction between defense and military diplomacy up to the examples of doing military diplomacy, they fall within the perspective of the mainstream IR theories wherein the state serves as the primary actor in terms of conducting diplomacy. And then from the critical look up to the concept of militarized neoliberalism, this is a critical look, a critical approach in understanding diplomacy by disaggregating the state, which is in contrast to the previous bullet points, which focuses on the state as the primary actor, wherein the state is considered as a whole or a monolithic body. So after providing this critical look, I introduced the idea of militarized neoliberalism for you guys to understand that military diplomacy is not only an initiative or a movement or an effort conducted by military leaders. It is always entangled. Take note, it is always entangled on certain economic interests. Okay, let us first differentiate. What's the difference between defense diplomacy and military diplomacy? So I tried to tabulate it and juxtapose the two terms here. So defense diplomacy is actually a broader category. It includes both the uniform and civilian personnel in terms of conducting diplomatic activities, interactions in the military arena between two or more states. Defense diplomacy is anchored on the assumption that collaboration in military arena leads to political rapprochement. So the more the military sector of two or more countries collaborate, build trust, interact, forge relationships throughout time, it leads to political rapprochement or better relationship leading to peacetime conditions, basically. Examples of defense diplomacy usually are the following. The annual IISS Shangri-La Dialogue, which is annually held in Singapore. Then you also have the annual Munich Security Conference, which I think in Germany, of course it's Munich. Uh, in Germany, it's also annual. Lately, there's certain think tanks from the Philippines that have launched another platform, and it's called the Manila Dialogue. And it was actually last month only. Sorry, it was only last September. The first Manila Dialogue occurred last September 2025. Although we will need to see whether it will be similar to the Shangri-La, the prestigious Shangri-La Dialogue in Singapore, or it will be like more of a platform only for academics, NGOs, and the military to talk and exchange ideas. So it's still an effort. It's still being incubated. So we need to see whether this Manila Dialogue will emerge as a platform of defense diplomacy in the coming years. In contrast, we have the military diplomacy, which is a more specific form or a subset form of what we call defense diplomacy. Military diplomacy is basically military to military relations and arrangements. So in contrast to defense diplomacy includes civilian personnel. But for military diplomacy, no. In military diplomacy, there's the use of military assets and resources in non-violent ways to attain positive outcomes, which is peacetime. Military can be also bilateral and multilateral, which also applies to defense diplomacy. And the very essence of conducting military diplomacy is to exercise peacetime cooperation via the use of armed forces and infrastructure to attain certain or specific foreign and security policy goals or objectives. What are the purposes of military diplomacy? Number one is to build interoperability and capacity among allies. For this example, I would like to cite this case, AUKUS, which is an acronym for or amalgamating the three countries: Australia, UK, and the United States. So what is AUKUS? Some of you might know already its issue, but just to provide a background for those who do not know, initially, prior to the pandemic, Australia and France had a deal that Australia will purchase nuclear submarines from France. But during the pandemic in 2020 to 2021, Australia rescinded its contract with France and decided to instead purchase nuclear submarines from the United States and the UK for the purposes of what we call interoperability. Ano yung sabihin? What do we mean by interoperability? It means that so that the systems between the naval warships, the submarines between Australia, UK, and US are all aligned and they use the same program. Kumbaga in layman's terms, the same hardware or software so that there will be alignment and harmonization in case the three countries need to mobilize if there is a conflict. So that's why for Australia, okay, let's batch the deal with France and let's go and accept the offer from the UK and the US. It is actually a diplomatic faux pas. It's a very, uh, it's not only a diplomatic embarrassment, but it's also a very messy, diplomatic engagement because of course France has the right to become angry because of this one, because of Australia backing down from the original deal. Another purpose of military diplomacy is to build strategic depth in one's regional background, also to gain influence in countries where the military is the key actor. This applies for this third bullet. This applies usually to countries that are ruled by military junta or the military has a very influential role in the political system or in politics, broader politics in general. Other purposes of military diplomacy includes better apprehend the strategic cultures of other states, build crisis-proof bilateral relationships and improve mutual understanding, and build capacity of other states and their militaries to contribute to shared tasks. Examples of military diplomacy. Number one is bilateral and multilateral contacts between senior commanders and senior chiefs. So ano nangyayari dito? Or how how does the first bullet happen or occur? So of course, there should be a framework already. There should be a framework already that will guide the interaction of these senior commanders and senior military chiefs between two or more countries. So in order for this one to be executed, one country should have another agreement with another country. It usually starts with what we call a memorandum of agreement. or understanding, sorry, first starts with MOU. And then this MOU usually lasts for 2 or more years. And then if this interaction were seen to have this what we call fruits of or milestones, they will upgrade it into a memorandum of agreement, and then until the time it will become it becomes a formal treaty. Usually that's the ranking, memorandum of um, understanding, memorandum of agreement, then a treaty. Next is appointment of defense attaches in the embassies. In the embassies that in some embassies that we have across the world, some of them have the what we call how some of them have what we call defense attaches. So do you remember my discussion about the diplomatic institutions, particularly the makeup of a certain embassy? So you remember my discussion about my experience working in MECO, wherein its organizational blueprint, or yeah, its organizational structure is actually patterned after a Philippine embassy. So in that case, I mentioned there that you have the trade and commercial attaché from the DTI, you have the labor attaché from the DOLE, and ngayon parang I think DMW na, and then minsan merong tourism attaché. But here, there's also the existence of what we call the defense attaché. One of the countries where we have a defense attaché is Tokyo. Sorry, Japan. In the Philippine Embassy in Tokyo. Why? Because we have good military relations with Japan. So it's part of the fruits that emerge after these decades of collaboration with Japan under the United States security umbrella. Of course, you have the bilateral defense cooperation agreements. Lately, ang dami natin yan. During the Marcos administration, we have a lot of cooperation agreements. US, Japan, a lot of signing ceremonies. US, Japan, New Zealand, Australia. Yeah. And then provision of expertise and advice on the democratic control of armed forces, and then defense management. Other examples include contacts and exchanges between military personnel and ship visits. So we usually find it in the news. It's usually reported when a certain American naval ship visits the Philippines, or a UK ship or Japanese ship visit the Philippines. So that's an example. So most of the time, it has logistical functions. It has cooperational functions, and it has also symbolic functions, because it's a it's a way to project to a country's enemies or threats that you need to exercise caution, because if you continue to pursue or invade or exercise threats towards us, then we can call our allies to help us. Placement of military personnel in the armed forces or defense ministries of partner countries. So parang defense attaché, but mas formal ito. It's more formal because there's this appointment. And then deployment of training teams, and then provision of military engagement and other material aid, and then the bilateral and multilateral exercises. Usually, an example of this one is the Balikatan exercises between the Philippines and the United States. Okay, so yeah, I provided a background already on how military diplomacy is exercised. So in that case, such perspective is very traditional to IR. It falls within the perspective of the mainstream IR theories, which is very state-centric and then national state-driven. What do I mean by national state driven? So when we conduct diplomacy, it is always the expectation that it's always a government to government interaction, meaning the national government, not the local or other regional government. It's always the national. That's why I noted here it's national state driven. In addition, the perspective on the conduct of military diplomacy is always premised on the idea that this is for the national interest. And it's understandable because at the end of the day, one of the national interests of all states is one of the national interests of all states is national security. But the question there is, how do we define the parameters of national interest? What are the limits what are the boundaries or where does it end? Kumbaga, okay, military diplomacy is for the national interest, but the way you exercise it, the way you pursue projects and cooperation with other countries, until what limit? Until until what are the boundaries? What are the horizons? Then that's the where the critical perspective on military diplomacy enters. And to have a critical look at military diplomacy, I always, usually in my analysis or in my writings, I always employ the political economy framework, especially in terms of conducting diplomacy and foreign policy. Okay, to apply a political economy framework in the exercise of military diplomacy, military diplomacy across the world, I want you to understand I want to introduce first the idea of what we call militarized neoliberalism. So what is militarized neoliberalism? Before we go that, since we are doing some political economy stuff here in understanding diplomatic activities, I would like to again to put a backgrounder, to have a backgrounder on neoliberalism. So to understand neoliberalism, we need to understand that first there is this what we call capitalist development. So this is a development brought by the global capitalist system. And the assumption by political economists on capitalist development is yes, there's development, but it is a development that creates winners and losers. It creates winners and losers. And with the presence of winners and losers, all winners, all losers, they create alliances with each other. So I just want to clarify, the winners and losers that I'm talking about here are domestic actors inside a country. So for example, there is a trade agreement between, or let's go to a more specific and more recent example. There is the United States imposed tariffs to the Philippines, for example. Many of the analysis there always say that it's bad for the Philippines. It's bad for the Philippine economy, etc., etc. But actually, if you're going to look at it on a more in-depth level, it's not actually the whole Philippines who will suffer from the tariffs. I understand that the issue of tariffs falls on the economic and business diplomacy, which is another lesson for this week. But I'm just giving an example for you guys to understand the dynamics of capitalist development. So, but actually, because of the American tariffs, it's not always that the whole Philippines will suffer. Why? Because it is only the exporters who will suffer, not actually the whole exporting class or the whole export industry, but actually specific exporters. Why? Balik tayo, let's go back on the April 2024 tariffs imposed by Trump to the Philippines. Philippine goods that will enter the United States, particularly food and commodity goods. So exporters specializing in the export of food and commodities, they are the ones who will be badly hit by these tariffs. Why? Because for Trump, all other products except electronics and semiconductors, they will be taxed, or they need to pay tariffs. They will pay tariffs. But for semiconductors and electronics, no, you are free. You are free from tariffs, or you are exempted from this rule. So in that case, the winners are the semiconductor exporters from the Philippines, and then the losers are the food, beverage, and commodity exporters from the Philippines. So yeah, so in that case, that's example of winners and losers. So all of these winners and losers, they usually build alliances with each other. So they build coalitions. And this is the reason why I noted here that the first bullet refers to what we call the importance of social relations and social conflict. So, capitalist development is always uneven. Not everyone benefits from it. There will be always winners and losers. That is the reason why we have social conflict. or contestations within the state. That's the reason why there is politics, political competition and contestation within states, within political system. Okay. The recent form of capitalist development that we have here in history is what we call neoliberalism. Neoliberalism is a form of capitalism that started in the 1970s from the United States, which promoted state retreat from the economy, meaning that the state should have a very minimal role, should have a very minimal role in the economy so that the market actors, like especially businesses, can grow, survive, innovate. In short, according to neoliberalism, which is a capitalistic ideology, economic growth and development is guaranteed if the state will step out from the economy. In case, take note, second, in case that there will be a need for the state to intervene in the economy, that intervention should only institute an institutional framework. The state should only introduce an institutional framework that will further promote competition and provide a level playing field among competing market actors. That's the only limitation there. Okay, many of you guys have been exposed or have been taking that idea for granted because some professors are actually um, supporters or unconscious of uh, of the repercussions of such idea. But as I have said, there will be always winners and losers in those in capitalist development. In that case, the implementation of neoliberal policies such as free trade, privatization, spending cuts, ang nananalo dito is usually business actors. And the losers are usually some people, some sectors, usually consumer orgs, etc. Although I might say that the business sector is not always homogeneous, also monolithic. Some, as I have, based on the example of Trump's tariffs to the Philippines, there might be also internal fractions, or what we call we call it in political economy as capital fractions in within the capitalist class. We call it capital fractions. Okay, so the social conflict brought by neoliberalism or the neoliberalization of states actually leads to what we call state transformation. And I think I've already taught or discussed state transformation during the first day of classes, or sorry, during lecture one. But just to remind, state transformation is the transformation of the state. That such transformation is defined by what we call three vectors, if you remember: fragmentation, decentralization, and internationalization. Okay, some of you guys are my students in other class where I also apply or employ the idea of state transformation. But the application of state transformation in this class, in this lecture, is to explain why certain states conduct this kind of foreign policy objectives and diplomatic behavior. And in this case, we are explaining the conduct of military diplomacy from the perspective of state transformation, which is a critical approach in foreign policy analysis and diplomatic studies. Okay, in order for these three vectors to occur, like for example, fragmentation, which is the competition between, an example of fragmentation is competition between national ministries or bureaucracies, then decentralization, the increasing distancing between the central government and then the local governments, and they're uncoordinated. There are times that they are not really coordinated, etc. And then you have what we call internationalization, wherein some government bodies or state apparatuses, that's the language used by the theory, state apparatuses, but it simply means government bodies conduct their own internationalization activities outside the permission outside the permission of the national government, or if there are times also that the national government permits them or just takes a blind eye for these ministries or local governments to do international activities. Okay, but for these three vectors to occur, or one of these vectors to occur, there should be an institutional framework that permit it. And that institutional framework leads to what we call, or is equated, sorry, it not leads, but that institutional framework that that permits these vectors to occur is the what we call transformed state apparatuses. So paano nagka-transform ang state apparatuses? Dito na pumapasok, here comes the concept of what we call militarized neoliberalism. According to the idea or to the concept of militarized neoliberalism, a concept introduced by Trisha Wijaya and Kanishka Jayasuriya, economic state apparatuses like the DTI, for example, in the case of the Philippines, Department of Trade and Industry, Department of or the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas, Department of Finance, or Department of Finance, or the Board of Investments. So these are economic state apparatuses. These are government bodies that are considered as the what we call their officers, the secretaries, as the economic managers of the president. They are now actually doing activities that are entangled with national security concerns, and vice versa. The security apparatuses like the Philippine National Police, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Armed Forces of the Philippines, Philippine Coast Guard, etc., etc., they are now functioning or doing what we call economic concerns. Economic concerns. So in that case, there's, I mean, the transformation there has something to do with going beyond a certain government's office original mandate. And that becomes possible because military concerns and economic concerns, according to militarized neoliberalism, they are entangled. Magkakabit sila. This is in contrast to the perspective earlier when I discussed military and defense diplomacy from a national state-driven viewpoint wherein the main actor that's usually being looked at is the military itself, the military sector itself. But according to the critical look at military diplomacy, particularly through the political economy lens, no. You may see the you may see the military as the one who represents the Philippines in the military arena with other states, but at the end of the day, this military can only exercise such kind of activities or agreements if the economic base or their economic supporters permit it. And this is where militarized neoliberalism enters because, as you've seen here, the entanglement between 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 the security apparatus and then, sorry, the national security concerned government offices. Let's do the layman ano. Let's stick with the layman's terms. The national security offices like AFP, PNP, and the economic agencies, government agencies like the DTI, etc., they are collaborating. And the area where they collaborate is actually what we call the defense industry. The area where they meet, collaborate, or they are entangled is the defense industry. Okay, in the article, I think I'll upload the militarized neoliberalism article in Canvas so that you can read it. But in the articles of Trisha Wijaya, she actually used the case of Japan. The case of Japan to demonstrate the idea of militarized neoliberalism. Why? Because she observed that in the case of Japan, Japan's Ministry of Economics, Trade, Industry have already what? Have already onboarded investments from the defense industry. Defense industry, these are the companies, the group of companies that are responsible for the production of weapons, the production of weapons, ammunition, military technology, and other warfare stuff or warfare equipment. So originally kasi like for example, here in the Philippines, these defense and industry companies, they are entangled or they have relationships with the army officials. But in the case of Japan, as discussed in her article, this defense industry have already been collaborating with the METI, Ministry of Economic Trade and Industry. And on the other hand, the Ministry of Defense of Japan have also collaborated with actually venture capital startups on AI, robotics, etc., etc. So those startups that are actually more on software, that usually the expectation is for them to collaborate or seek the support of the METI, Ministry of Economic and Trade and Industry. But instead, this venture capitalist startups, they went to the protection, or to the endorsement of the Ministry of Defense of Japan. Excuse me. So in this case, a classic example where militarized neoliberalism manifests is what we call the military-industrial complex, which is the defense industry, as I have said. This is the arena. And actually, the Philippines is actually experiencing this militarized neoliberalism. So here are some of the concrete examples where militarized neoliberalism happens in the Philippine case, particularly in our conduct of diplomatic relations with other countries. I want you to recall this, what we call 2024 US-Japan Trilateral Summit, wherein, um, sorry, it's not 2024. I think this is 2023. Sorry, I'll just edit the slides. So wherein, the US, Japan, and the Philippine presidents, they met in Washington, and then after their meeting, they released this kind of lengthy joint statement wherein they noted the construction of what we call the Luzon Economic Corridor, that the what we call this one, that the United States and Japan will sponsor the creation of the Luzon Economic Corridor in order to transform the Philippines from central Luzon up to southern Luzon to become a semiconductor production hub. And if we actually when we meet on class on our in-person class every Saturday, I'll let you guys to read the joint statement, and you will see there that the language is very benign. It's not really threatening. It's not really ambitious. It's not ambitious. It's not threatening. It's really benign, very neutral tone. But this is actually a good skill that you need to, as future analyst, regardless whether you'll be in the government, or you'll be in the corporate sector, or you'll be in the development sector. This is a good way of reading policy documents. Read between the lines. This is a really good skill that you need to develop. If you are going to read between the lines, the very reason why the Philippines will be transformed a semiconductor production hub, is to position the Philippines as an alternative from Taiwan, because there's this China threat of invasion to Taiwan, and we know that Taiwan is one of the, yeah, semiconductor capital or centers of the world. So in order in order to ensure the resiliency of the semiconductor supply chain, then the Philippines is now being positioned as an alternative. Some of you might ask, why semiconductors? What's the importance? Kasi semiconductors are electronic appliances. Sorry, they are parts of electronic appliances. They are the constitutive parts of electronic products. Why semiconductors? Because, as I have said, the document was written in a benign way, but in reality, semiconductors are, yeah, they're also used for military technology and military equipment. So yeah, you can see there the entanglement of economics and security, national security, because if we see at the surface level, semiconductors, they are just chips, they are just um those constitutive parts of hardware, but these are very vital components of military equipment and military technology. And then in the Philippines, during the Marcos administration, there's also the passage of what we call the Self-Defense Reliance Posture Law and the Special Defense Economic Zones Act. So the very the very names of this law suggests the entanglement of military and economic sectors or economic interest and security interest. Let's look at the self-defense reliance posture law. Ano ang sinasabi ng self-defense reliance posture law? Instead of just, according to this law, look at it if you're during your free time. If instead of just relying on foreign suppliers or foreign defense companies, like for example, the usual foreign defense companies that we have here is usually um you no. The ones from Germany, South Korea, yeah, those foreign defense companies. Instead, sabi ni according to this law, instead of just relying to them, we need to develop our own local industry, local defense industry, and to develop the local defense industry, the government should prioritize procuring. Take note, the government should prioritize procuring military weapons or warfare weapons like guns, ammunition from local defense companies. I can cite at least two examples of local defense companies. Number one is Armscor, and then the other one is UDMC. So, because of the self-defense reliance posture law, the the government offices are now compelled to first prioritize procuring supply of military equipment and other military equipment from locally owned defense companies or defense firms. So that's the meaning of the self-defense reliance posture law. And then the next one is the Special Defense Economic Zones Act. So ano ibig sabihin naman? Magki-create daw ng special economic zones dedicated for the defense industry. And these foreign and local players who will operate within this special defense economic zones or the SPEDEZA, they will get specific incentives. They will get specific incentives, tax holidays, etc., etc. Right now, it's not yet specified, guys. We are expecting it's not yet specified kung ano yung what are the incentives or the tax holidays or the other benefits that the defense industries will avail or can avail once they relocate within the special defense economic zones, because we are still waiting from the SITP from the Malacanang strategic investments plan from Malacanang, but the expectation is it will be released this December. So if you're interested on military diplomacy, national security concerns, wait for it, and let's see what will be the favors that will be given by the Philippine government to the defense industry. So yeah. So yeah, this is the end of our lecture for military diplomacy. Thank you for watching this video, and the next lesson will talk about economic and business diplomacy.